Raven's Flight by Diane Sylvie. Chapter 5. Raven woke up the next morning in Marcy's room and decided to get an early start. She and Ben had discussed places to search for her sister last night while he had walked her home. First, she needed to find a telephone. The one in the hall said, "out of order." She decided to walk back to the bus depot to use the payphones there. The ones on the streets around here were broken or too risky. Standing around was an open invitation to get robbed, harassed, or even stabbed with a stray needle. Most of the people down there were too stoned or mentally ill to even know what they were doing. When she got to the depot, she dialed the operator and asked for assistance, placing a long-distance call. "Just tell me the number," the operator said kindly. "I don't know the number, but I can tell you the name of the store and the store's owner's name," Raven replied. "That's fine. I'll look it up," the operator offered. A few seconds passed, and then she said, "I have the store on the line. How do you wish to pay for the call?" "Collect," she said nervously. "What was that? I'm afraid you'll have to speak up. I can't hear you," the operator instructed. "I want to call collect, please. Please say it's Raven, Jim's girl," Raven answered. Frank answered and said, "Hello? Raven, is that you? How are you?" "I'm fine, but I haven't found Marcy yet, and my cousin Rita's mixed up in something and never around. Can you please give my father that message and ask him to tell me what he thinks I should do? I'll phone back tomorrow." "Are you all right? Are you in danger?" "No, I'm safe, but I need advice. I have a few leads and someone who knows the area, but I need to know what Mom and Dad think I should do. I'll take the message over later today as soon as I close the store." Even though it was early in the morning, people hung around the washrooms in front of the Carnegie Center. Raven searched every face, hoping to see her sisters. Absent-mindedly, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the necklace Marcy had given her for her last birthday. She gazed fondly at the Raven medallion and put it around her neck. She was determined to find her sister. She prayed Marcy was safe and that she could soon put her parents at ease. She continued along the street as the dealers called out to her as she walked by. "What you want? Up? Down?" A guy walked by and muttered under his breath, "How much?" The dealer closest to him responded, "Coke, 20. Heroin, 10. A dark green van pulled into the alley adjacent to the center. The sign on the van read, "Deas Needle Exchange." 3 young guys with squeegees stood on the street corner looking for car windows to wash. As soon as they saw the van pull in, they scurried over to it like scabs after a choice bit of meat. They made the trade and then retreated into the alley. Their arms were reduced to pincushions, littered with track marks from shooting up. A tag read, "Lost Alley, the shooting gallery for the Walking Dead." Raven thought that whoever had spray-painted that on the alley wall knew what they were talking about. A small green fern clung to one of the jagged cracks in the alley wall. She felt a sudden wave of homesickness as she remembered the lush green of the salal in the woods near the campground. Raven walked past a woman picking things up off the ground, but on closer inspection she realized the woman was obviously hallucinating, imagining that she was picking up crumbs of crack and putting them in her lap. She cocked her head to one side, listening. Raven saw the crazed look in the woman's eyes and backed away. The muscles around her mouth twitched. In the next doorway, a girl, no more than 14 or 15, lay in a coma-like sleep, open sores around her mouth, and a length of glass tubing poking out of her pocket. Her hair was matted, her coat was torn, filthy. Her fingertips were caked with thick black dirt. Raven returned to Oppenheimer Park, convinced that someone there might be able to give her a lead. Besides, she and Ben had arranged to meet there before conducting another search. It was a high-traffic area, and the odds were better. A man in his late 50s was acting very oddly. His antics had more in common with a child than someone of his age. He tiptoed behind 2 men and a woman. Every time they stopped, the man ran and hid behind a tree. 2 other men sat close watching. Bushy tail, they shouted in chorus, pointing at the squirrel-like man and laughing. "I don't have a bushy tail," he shouted back. Bushy tail, the men boomed. "I don't have a bushy tail, you do," he taunted. Indignantly, he looked over his shoulder to see if he had sprouted a tail. Satisfied he didn't, he scampered merrily down the street. Raven found a rickety chair and watched as a very young woman with a stroller and a small boy in tow entered the park. She sat down beside Raven while her little boy raced over to the park attendant to ask for a tricycle. When the park employee went inside the long shack and came out carrying one, the boy's face lit up in delight, and he climbed on and pedaled back and forth in front of the building. Close to the building, Raven spotted syringe caps, discarded needles, wrappers, spitball bags, condoms, and beer bottles in danger of being stepped on or picked up by curious toddlers. How many of these children would grow up to live on the street, use needles or heroin like the girls she had seen in the alley? The young mother struck up a conversation, saying that she was terrified to live here. She barricaded her door each night against thieves in search of items to steal and pawn for drug money. She tried to sleep between 7 and midnight, then stay awake to guard against intruders. She heard rats scurrying about in the dark, chewing on the corner of her mattress, the food in the cupboards, even the plastic lid of her deodorant bottle. She told Raven she had finally saved enough money from her meager welfare check to buy a chicken wire to surround the baby's crib. A group of people on the west side of the park congregated in front of the All Tribes mission. A ragtag line started to assemble as the deep sound of a whistle marked the noon hour. Men and women exited the building, devouring bologna and peanut butter sandwiches. An old woman in an electric wheelchair zoomed past Raven, stopped here and there to ask, "When are the videos going to start?" No one seemed to know, so she zipped down to the other end of the building to look for the park attendant. "Hi, Raven. I'm sorry I'm late," Ben apologized, walking up to her. "That's okay. I'm enjoying the sunshine," Raven answered. "Did you have any luck this morning?" Ben asked. Raven shook her head sadly. "I have to pick up a few things for the party and be back to the warehouse by 5 o'clock. "How did you all end up living in a warehouse anyway? Why doesn't Birdie have a proper place to live?" Raven asked. "She used to, but she's scared to live there now. She lived in a housekeeping room on the downtown east side. One day, a young guy started hanging around her building. He seemed friendly, but turned out to be a professional. He gained the confidence of the elderly tenants by being kind to them and managed to get into the building. Then he started taking advantage and moved in with Birdie's neighbor, George. George didn't even protest at first, but this guy took over, slept in George's bed, didn't pay any rent and ate his food. He didn't give him a cent. If George protested, he beat him up. George was too scared to go to the police, afraid they would really get at it if he ratted on him. He roughed him up regularly anyway. George kept running a bar tab at the Dobson Hotel. He'd cash his check at the hotel and pay his beer tab. Then he paid his rent and bought a few groceries. But whatever was left over from his pension check was confiscated. When George's friends went in with baseball bats, the bully got the message and took off. But a few months later, George turned up dead. Birdie was scared and decided to move out. She said she'd rather live on the streets. Anyway, that's the story. People think that everyone who lives down here is deprived or wasted, but there must be dozens of stories like Birdie's, like yours, Raven said. You'll notice a lot of regulars as we walk up the strip. If I see any I know, I'll ask them if they've seen your sister lately. They walked south through the intersection of Main and Hastings. Raven was amazed at the crowd congregated in front of the Carnegie Center. Earlier in the morning, there had been only a smattering of people, but now the stairs were jam-packed. A dozen or so folding tables displaying all sorts of wares made it look almost like a bazaar. Come on, let's get going. Look, there's Gertrude up ahead. Hi, Gertrude. May I carry your bag? Ben asked when they had reached her. Ben, it's so good to see you. Yes, I could use a hand. How's Birdie doing these days? Not too well. She's been having a few more spells lately. I'm worried about her. She's a tough one, old Birdie. She knows enough to go to the doctor when she has to. Don't you worry. Gertrude, this is Raven. She's a friend of mine. Raven, that's a very beautiful name. My grandmother named me. It's nice to meet you, Gertrude, Raven replied. Well, shall we go to my place? I haven't had any guests in a long time. No, indeed, not in a very long time. Ben and Raven each carried a bag. They turned the corner heading east on Kiefer Street. We have to go around back. The bolt on the front fence is broken. She led them around the house and through the alley. The yard was strewn with debris, an old washing machine, a mattress, and a car up on blocks. Watch your step here. The sidewalk's cracked. Broken glass and rusted cans littered the walkway. Raven wondered if Gertrude lived in this huge old house by herself. They walked up 3 flights of stairs to the top landing. Gertrude was extremely winded. She grasped the railing for support, saying her back hurt something fierce. She took a deep breath, then rummaged through her purse for her key. That's strange. I could have sworn I put it in my purse. Perhaps it's under the mat. Can you check, Ben? Ben put the bag down and searched under the mat. No, nothing here. Oh my, I'm getting so forgetful. Now what did I do with that darn thing? Think. Yes, I remember. My pocket. She slipped her hand inside her pocket and retrieved the key. Here it is. Thank goodness. The door creaked loudly as it swung open. Ben and Raven followed her into the small bed-sitting room. Gertrude bustled about putting her things away. She untied her hat and hung it up on a nail protruding from the wall. Sit down. I'll put a pot of tea on. She filled an old pot with water, placed it on a hot pot plate, and turned it on high. Raven and Ben both looked around for a place to sit. Ben perched on the windowsill and motioned for Raven to sit down on the foot of the bed. Do you like your tea strong or weak? Weak, thanks, they both replied. Because if you like it strong, I can always use a new tea bag. Gertrude grabbed an old tea bag off the towel rack and popped it in the boiling water. I can get 2 pots of tea from one bag if I'm careful. She plopped herself down on the small wooden rocking chair. Now, then, we'll let the tea steep a mite. Tell me about yourself, Raven. What brings you to the city? I'm looking for my sister, Marcy. Raven held out the picture, wondering how Gertrude knew she wasn't from the city. She's a pretty girl, just like you. Have you seen her around? Ben asked. Seen her around? Oh my, no, she replied absent-mindedly. Raven was curious about how Gertrude ended up living in a place like this. She didn't seem to fit. Her speech and manner showed signs of a good upbringing. Ben poured the tea and handed 1 mug to Gertrude and 1 to Raven. On the small nightstand next to Gertrude's bed was a silver picture frame. It held a photo of a very distinguished-looking man. Lying next to the frame was a brush and mirror set with silver inlaid handles. On the back of the mirror, the single silver initial, G, was written in fancy script. The 3 expensive-looking pieces were totally out of place. Raven looked around the room. Everything else was either makeshift or shoddy. Did you always live here, Gertrude? Gertrude thought for a few seconds. Did I always live here? Why, no. I used to live in West Vancouver, but that was a long time ago. When did you move? Years ago, after I started work as a waitress. It wasn't always this way. I used to live in a proper house, a splendid house. My husband, Mr. Dobson, was a busy lawyer, you know. He had a booming practice. We often entertained his clients. What did you do, Gertrude? Do? Why, look after Mr. Dobson, of course. What do you mean? Well, every morning I got Mr. Dobson ready for work. I took pride in making sure his shirt, tie, and coat matched. I laid them out in a row on the bed. I know he appreciated it. Why, he even told me so once. Besides, it certainly kept my days quite full. Quite full. Did you ever have another kind of job outside of the house? Raven asked. She couldn't believe Gertrude hadn't had to lift a finger in those days. Her own mother worked from dawn until, well, after Raven and her brothers were in bed doing household chores. Me? Why, no, I was much too busy. I had to plan the menu with the cook each day, and, of course, if we were entertaining, it was doubly difficult. Mr. Dobson liked things just so. Yes, indeed. It was my job to supervise the housekeeper, make sure all the flowers were fresh. Raven recalled Tim and Alan picking handfuls of wildflowers and jamming them into old jars to surprise their mom. She and Gertrude were worlds apart. Where was I? Oh my, yes, I was telling you about Mr. Dobson. He was quite adamant that everything be spit and polish. The silverware had to shine until you could see your face in it. The chandelier had to be cleaned 1 crystal at a time. And believe me, if the housekeeper missed one, Mr. Dobson would be sure to detect it. Certainly it was a full-time job being Mrs. Dobson. At least it used to be. Then one day, my whole world fell apart. The police came to my door and told me he had been killed in a car crash. What did you do? Did you have any family nearby? No, I'm an only child, as was my husband. Both sets of parents had long passed on. Mr. Dobson had mortgaged the house heavily. I had never done any kind of work. I soon found out there weren't many openings for hostesses. The only jobs I could find paid minimum wage. I had no hope of keeping up the mortgage payments on our home with that income. My only alternative was to move out. What about insurance? My husband had let the policy lapse. I was on my own. No skills and few prospects. In fact, I had never held down a job. I got married right after high school. What did you do? I got a job waiting tables. My wages didn't pay for rent on a big place as well as groceries, so a waitress I worked with told me about these housekeeping rooms. I checked them out and decided to move in. How long have you lived in this neighborhood? Too long, child. Too long. And now I'm retired. I'll never be able to move out with my small pension check. I have enough, though, enough to pay my rent and just feed myself. She sat quietly for a few moments, then drifted off into a light sleep. Raven looked at Ben, concerned. He shrugged his shoulders and grinned. They sat still, not wanting to disturb Gertrude, but unsure whether they should stay or leave. Gertrude shifted slightly in the rocker and sat up straight, blinking. Oh, hello, Ben. When did you get here? And who's this with you? Ben played along, pretending they had just arrived. He winked at Raven. We just got here. We thought we'd drop by and say hello. That's nice. She smiled and drifted back to sleep. Ben signaled it was time to go. The door shut quietly behind them. Is she all right, Ben? Yeah, she's drifted off like that for as long as I can remember. I think it's her way of escaping. Gertrude might not have any control over where she lives. She has control over how much time she spends awake, experiencing it. We better head back downtown to get the present and the cake. It's almost time. What are you getting Robert? A harmonica. He's wanted one for so long. He's so musical, it seems a shame he doesn't have an instrument. Bertie is looking after the present for Anna.